Greetings all, this is Rick Levine with your August 2024 astrological forecast. First of all, I would like to share my appreciation for your participation here. You know, I do my best to bring you the best quality of astrological information that I can every month, and quite frankly, your participation, your comments, whether I agree with them or not, whether you agree with me or not, your comments warm my heart. Last month, over 80,000 of you viewed the July forecast and the mid-month update, which is usually reserved for the $3 a month Patreon subscribers that I offered to the public just because we were in times of such intense change. That the mid-month was viewed by over 50,000 people. Thank you all. And as intense as July was, the shock and surprises of Uranus and Pluto are not over. August will not disappoint those of us who keep one eye on the planetary movements while the other eye is focused on events here on Earth. And if you want to receive the mid-month update, be sure to go to my Patreon page, sign up for the solar tier. Remember, your subscription is strictly month to month. And quite frankly, as the intensity of these election year events settle down, you can unsubscribe whenever you wish. And the place to go is patreon.com/Rick Levine. The link is below, and also, as all the other links that I'll mention are in the video description, that will also be below. And by the way, subscribing to this channel doesn't only help me, but it also helps you because you get notified when I post the any YouTube videos. All you need to do is click on the notify button. Now, as many of you know, I have an email list separate from YouTube, and each month I do a mini reading on someone's natal chart that focuses particularly on the harmonic aspects, which is one of my pet interests in natal horoscope interpretation. Each month, a winner is picked from my email list by my assistant Gail using a program called Random. It's a program that's on a site called random.org. And once each person on my email list is randomly assigned a number, she uses random.org to pick a number from the people on the list. Winners for the last 2 months were Susan Schmidt and Jackie Roberts. Both have already received their free reading. And this month's random number was 6914. And that number belongs to Jennifer Jane. And so, Jennifer, if you're watching, you will receive an email from me shortly with instructions on what to do next to receive your free reading. And congratulations! And if you want to be in the in the hat for the drawing for next month, make sure you go to www.ricklevineastrologer.com and sign up for the email list. I promise your email will never be shared with anyone else. I won't deluge you with information and an overload of marketing information. However, you will receive notifications on my YouTube posts and other online activities, some event notifications, and even random astrological updates. Okay. That's it for there. I now want to mention a couple of events coming up. For those of you who don't want to watch these, fast forward through it. But for those of you who do, they are here. On the first Friday night of every month, I do a live night at the Soul Food Coffee House here in Redmond, Washington, near where I live. This month's event, the first Friday night of August, is on August 2nd. It's at 6:30 p.m., but that's Pacific time. And if you're not in the vicinity, if you are, come on down. We have a lot of fun. And if you're not in the vicinity, you can watch the live stream either as it's happening, as it's being streamed live, or you can watch it after the fact. Just go to youtube.com/astrological @Rick Levine, @Rick Levine. That'll bring you to my channel, and there'll be a link there for the live stream on Friday night, August 2nd. I will be at the Astrological Association of Great Britain's 56th annual conference. I think this is my 5th or 6th one that I've spoken at. And this one's going to be from August 28th to September 1st. And it's at a beautiful conference venue up near Coventry, near Leicester, up Birmingham way, that way. And the link for that conference, again, like all the other links, will be below here, and the clickable link will be in the comments. I'm doing a pre-conference workshop there on harmonic aspects in natal chart consultations, and I'm doing a talk on the conference itself. These are great conferences. If you live in England, if you're in the area, you can join us, and it will be a lot of fun. Also, in September, I'm going to be the Astrology Hub's Inner Circle Guide. If you want more information on that or sign up for the Inner Circle, you can go to astrologyhub.com and sign up there. In October, from October 16th through the 21st, OPA, the Organization for Professional Astrology, will be holding a conference called Awakening, Celebrating the Aquarian Shift. And this is going to be at the New Park Resorts in Park City, Utah. Beautiful setting. You can fly into Salt Lake City, and it's not a far drive up into the mountains and to get to Park City. This is a very unique conference. I've been involved with OPA for years. There are immersion tracks, peer group review tracks, and consulting skills track. Basically, there's one day of lectures where everybody is together, and there's, I think, 4 or 5 plenary session lectures. I'll be doing one of those. And then there'll be 3 days of individual work that is in small groups of not more than 10 people in a group with one teacher for 3 days. And when you register for the conference, you can register for which teacher you'd like to work with for those 3 days. And the complete offerings and what the curriculum is for each of the different teachers will be there. But these are very individual workings. It's not just lecture. It's really group process. And you can find out more about that. And that is many of the actual individual immersions are already filling up. So if you're interested, go check out opaastrology.org or use the link in the comments in the description. Then, primary event for me for the year, even though I love all these other conferences, on November 23rd through December 4th, I'm going to be back in Goa, India. Goa is a very unique part of India. It's south, a couple hundred miles south, I think it's about that, south of Bombay, Mumbai. And it's on the Arabian Sea. It's a 12-day full immersion astrological experience. Goa is magical, it's beautiful, it's spiritual. This is my major event of my teachings. It's initiation into astrology. This will be my 13th Heaven and Earth workshop, and Heaven and Earth workshops retreats are magnificent. This will combine pretty much the best of all my previous teachings. It's like the best of Rick Levine. And you can go to heavenandearthworkshops.com or to the link below, find out information, additional information. This very possibly will fill up. We're limiting this to 35 people, and it's being held at a place that's one of my favorite places to teach, and I usually stay there for a few weeks afterwards just because it's so magical. It's an Ayurvedic healing center, and it's a short few-minute walk down to a very magical, beautiful, swimmable beach on the Arabian Sea. The climate is beautiful. It's tropical, and if you go to the website, heavenandearthworkshops.com, and go to the astrology retreat page, there's complete information along with day-by-day activities and curriculum. Everything is taken care of from the moment you step off the plane to the moment you get back on the plane. Levine. It's quite an experience, and for those of you who have done this either last year or in times past, you know how magical and transforming this is. I invite you, whatever your level of astrology is, whether you're a practicing professional or a relatively new student, there's something in this for everyone, and it is not just lecturing. There's actual astrodrama and movement and experiential astrology. It's very cool, and I love doing this because of how much not only I get out of it, but because of how much of everyone seems to get out of it. That's it. In 2025, there's a conference, Convergence in Orlando, Florida, March 7th through 9th. I'll have more about that later. The link will be below also. And then in May, early May 9th to the 12th, there's a conference in Portugal, in Porto. More information on that to follow, but link below also. And then, of course, the end of May on Memorial Day weekend is NORWAC, the Northwest Astrology Conference, and I'll see many of you there. This will be my 34th NORWAC, I think. For the record, I am recording this very early in the morning on July 31st, Wednesday, July 31st. And it's an absolutely extraordinary month. And, you know, July itself was a bit overwhelming. This is something that most astrologers talked about in advance. We kind of knew something would happen. I don't think anyone knew the details of what would happen specifically, but coordinated with the dates that were the key dates of the month. We had several major events. Obviously, the Republican National Convention, the Republican Party National Convention on July 15th, was the exact date of the Mars-Uranus conjunction. Mars, the planet of conflict, Uranus, the planet of shock, surprise, Mars physical, and in both the mid-month update and in the July forecast, I and many other astrologers talked about the potential for some sort of sudden and unexpected violent act right around the days of the exact Mars-Uranus conjunction. And of course, on July 13th, just a couple days prior, we had the attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump. The other major event that was, I think, for many, somewhat expected or hoped for, and for others it was just a surprise that seemed to be something that would have just never have happened, was the declination, that's the declining of the Democratic nomination by Joe Biden, and that occurred on July 21st. And of course, this was very, very close to, or it was on the day actually, but very close to the full moon that many astrologers were talking about well in advance, the second Capricorn full moon that was conjoined with Pluto. And perhaps the other important thing about that date, and something that we'll come back to in a few minutes, is the fact that Mercury, the planet of communication, was squaring Uranus. Again, Uranus was joined by Mars on the day of the attempted assassination, and Uranus often by transit or even natally has to do with surprise, unexpected, shock, awe, something that breaks through the tension and allows us to move to someplace new. It's neither good nor bad as an energy unto itself. It simply releases pent-up tension. And on the day that Mercury squared Uranus on July 21st, that was when Biden made his announcement and endorsement of Kamala Harris, which has turned into an entire change of energy for many people that feels like movement, whether you feel like it's positive or negative movement, is not the issue. It was a Mercury squaring Uranus, and the sudden surprise of how intense that particular shift was and will continue to be is part of the theme for the month of August. because Mercury is turning retrograde, and Mercury turns retrograde on August 4th. We'll get to charts in just a moment, and just trying to give you a broad overview of some of the important things coming up for the month ahead. So, Mercury turns retrograde on August 4th, which means that it is now moving through what we call its shadow. Going back to July 16th, when Mercury moved through 21 degrees of Leo, that was when it entered its shadow. Because after Mercury turns retrograde on August 4th, Mercury will back up to that 21 degree of Leo spot again, and then it'll move forward, and it won't be until it passes the point at which it turned retrograde, and it will do that on September 8th. That whole period of time from July 16th to September 8th, Mercury is moving through this zone that we call its shadow, where it goes over at one time forward, then retrograde, it goes over that same place in the sky again, and then it goes forward a third and final time. Why is this important? Because when Mercury squared Uranus, it was already in its shadow. Meaning that when Mercury turns retrograde, Mercury will square Uranus a second time on August 18th. And then when it turns direct, it will then square Uranus a third and final time on September 6th. These three events will be tied together. And although at first they may seem like they're separate events, we will be reminded of what happened on the day of Biden's declining the presidential nomination, when Mercury squared Uranus back on July 21st. And on August 18th, when it squares it a second time, we can expect another series of surprising events. These are Uranus, they're sudden, they're shocking, but it's Mercury. It's not necessarily violent, as it was when Mars lined up with Uranus around the time of the attempted Trump assassination. Now, the thing about that August 18th date is that it is a cosmic pileup. Think of a traffic jam on the worst Los Angeles freeway during the worst accident rush hour that you can possibly think of. This is what's happening in that few days around August 14th through around the 20th or so. Now, let's just keep in mind that the Democratic National Convention begins on the day of August 19th, which is not only within a day of the time when Mercury makes that second square, the retrograde square to Uranus, but there's just a stack of other things going on there, that some are long-term events, some are short-term events. There's a couple of T-squares in the sky. T-squares build up energy and give us a way to resolve it or force us to attempt resolution. And on top of that, there's the first of three squares between expansive Jupiter and contractive Saturn. Jupiter and Saturn, to the ancients, were the social planets. They were the slowest moving planets that they knew about until we discovered Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction opposition cycle is a 20-year cycle, and Jupiter and Saturn basically conjoin in even-numbered decade years. What do I mean by that? Within a year, Jupiter and Saturn conjoined in 1880, 1900, 1920, 40, 60, 80, 2000. The actual conjunction was in 2001. And then in December of 2020 was the last Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. The oppositions occur on the odd decades in 1890, 1910, 30, 50, 70, 90, 2010, and the next one will be in 2030. Here we are halfway through the decade where we're going from the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction which occurred again late December of 2020, while we were in the midst of nationally mandated quarantines and a viral epidemic, and the intensity of the lockdown, and the vaccines were first being introduced around that period of time, and it was a very, very crazy and difficult time. Well, on this month in August, actually on August 19th, we have the first hard aspect angle between Jupiter and Saturn since their conjunction back at the end of 2020. And Jupiter squares Saturn on August 19th for the first of 3 times. It squares, it makes that same square again. It makes that same square again on the day before Christmas, on December 24th, and then it makes the third and final square next mid-June, on the 15th, 2025. And so we're at a point of conflict between the expansive growth that's the seed that was planted back in 2020, and now it bumps into a square with Saturn that says, whoa, slow down, make it real, give it structure, you can't do this, you have to do that. It's kind of this push-pull dance that's going to really take until next summer for us to really feel what's happening now that we're getting the first wave of in mid-August. On top of that same day, actually on the 19th, we have the Aquarius full moon. Now, we have an Aquarius full moon once a year, no big deal, but this one happens to be square to Uranus. Uranus again, the planet of shock and surprise and unexpected twists and turns. I call Uranus the quantum planet because it's like you never know what's going to happen. It's not predictable. It's like lightning. You can predict that there's going to be more lightning if you're in the midst of a storm, but you can't predict when it's going to occur and where it's going to strike. And so we're coming into this period, and this really is the key of the dynamic of understanding the month, the entire month of August. And I have a feeling that by the time we get to September, mid-September, we're going to feel like we've been in a cosmic accident. And I don't mean like there's necessarily destruction. It's like when you're in an accident, you get whiplash, and there's things that are just like being on a tilt-a-whirl out of control. The events are not over. The events of August are part of a process, and we're going to see more of this occur through the month of August. So that's a flavor of what's ahead. We also have all the regular stuff like the new moon, which we haven't really mentioned yet, on August 4th. The full moon, which we did mention, which is on the 19th. We have a few planets that change signs this month. Of course, we have this run from Leo into Virgo that's already begun, with Mercury already in Virgo, but Mercury will retrograde back into Leo and then into Virgo finally again. Venus will move into Virgo. Venus moves into Virgo on August 4th. We have the Sun moving into Virgo on August 22nd. And so it's almost like the brilliant light of the sun, of the hot midsummer sun. As things move into Virgo, the rays become more critical. They're more exacting. We need to modify our outward expression, so it's useful and effective and efficient, all Virgoan words. Venus moving quickly now. Venus is ahead of the sun by zodiac degree, but what that means is that we're seeing it in the evening as an evening star again, and Venus will be moving through Virgo through the month of August, but by August 29th, Venus moves into Libra, one of her home signs where she gains more power. These are all important events for the month of August. With no further ado, let's look at a chart. Okay, for the record, for those of you familiar with these monthly forecasts, you know that all the charts that we'll be looking at, with the exception of the new moon and full moon charts, are all for noon, which means that sometimes I'm talking about an event that may not happen until the later in the day, but all the charts we'll be looking at will be for noon, and that's Pacific Daylight Time. So wherever you are on the planet, you need to adjust to your time zone just by figuring out the number of time zones away from Pacific that you are. And also the charts that we're looking at do not have an ascendant or midheaven. We're just looking at the planets by sign and degree and the relationships, the aspects that they're making with one another, because where it's sunrise here might be the middle of the night for someone else, depending on where you are on the globe, and it could be sunset somewhere else. And so we have a chart without any horizon, so we're not showing a geographical bias. And so that, for example, at the chart here, and when I say here, and when I'm talking about a chart now, I'm always referring to the chart that we're looking at. I'm recording this early in the morning on Wednesday, July 31st. But the first chart that we are looking at is the chart for noon on August 1st. And so you can see that the moon is at 8 degrees of Cancer at noon on August 1st. And in fact, just for the record, the moon entered Cancer at 8:19 p.m. last night, meaning July 31st, because I'm always referring to the chart that's on the screen as today. So today's chart is the chart for August 1st, and we can see on August 1st that not only that the moon is in Cancer, we can see the sun at about 10 degrees of Leo. In fact, Venus is also in Leo. We're getting that summer Leo energy. And aside from lunar transits, there are no exact transits today, but I do want to point out the fact that Mars at 8 degrees of Gemini is moving and moves faster than Jupiter at 14 degrees of Gemini, which means that Mars, over the first weeks of this month, Mars will catch up to Jupiter, and the Mars-Jupiter conjunction will actually occur on August 14th. This is a big event, and it plays into the whole sequence of events that really come to a head between the 14th and the Aquarius full moon on the 19th. But I just want to point out here that we're looking at all these charts as following the energy and following it building up, where I as many of you know, I try not to take any one planet or planetary aspect totally out of the picture, because every aspect is occurring as part of a process and also part of a harmony with other planets involved. Now, one of the interesting things that we do see, Jupiter moves pretty slowly, but Jupiter is almost a square and a half to Pluto. A square and a half is 135 degrees, and Pluto at 0 degrees of Aquarius means that that a square to that point would be 0 degrees of Taurus, and then another 45 degrees, a half square, so a square and a half, would be at 15 degrees of Gemini. Jupiter reaches that square and a half, called a sesqui-square or a sesqui-quadrant. Jupiter reaches that aspect on August 7th. but we're already feeling this. And this Jupiter to Pluto is basically a bringing up from the deep, deep, deep places. That would be Pluto, Jupiter bringing it up and out into the open and expanding it. Now, in theory, that sounds great, but often hidden things as they're brought into the open, as they bubble to the surface, often those things can be very difficult and they can create their own layers of stress or conflict. Remember that the three key points of heightened mortality that was at least registered and given back to us as statistics, those three peaks back in 2020 were each related to Jupiter conjoining Pluto, Jupiter lining up with Pluto. So this Jupiter sesqui-square to Pluto as a background of August is just revealing that there's stuff that's gradually coming up, maybe even exploding at times, but those hidden things, those things from the unconscious, from the hidden, the fears, the things that are stuffed away, all Pluto's realm in the underworld, will be coming up gradually and explosively throughout the month. So, as we move this chart ahead to August 2nd, we do have an aspect that is significant, two of them, in fact. One is that Venus, moving through latter degrees of Leo, is squaring Uranus exactly. Now, if you look at the noon chart, it's actually just slightly higher, with Uranus still back at 26 degrees and some minutes, and Venus already at 27 degrees. The exact square between Venus and Uranus occurred at 6:26 this morning on Friday, August 2nd. Now, Venus is the planet of love and attraction and desire. Uranus, as we've already said, is the planet of unexpected, of shock, of things that are new and different. And when Venus squares Uranus, it's almost like we're attracted to solutions to problems that we previously resisted. When Venus squares Uranus, we're attracted to possible pleasures that we perhaps never had before. When Venus squares Uranus, we seem to be attracted to things that are new and are different and are out of the box. And so it doesn't mean that we need to act on everything that we are attracted to. But remember, this in some way is reflecting or restimulating the Mercury square Uranus, which occurred back on July 21st, on the day that Biden made his historic announcement of stepping down as the Democratic nominee and endorsing Kamala Harris. So now, as Venus is squaring Uranus, we may expect some heightened energy about being attracted to something that we hadn't considered attractive before. And whether that's in politics or in your personal life, it's also a time when we could spend money on something that we just get this impulse because we think we are attracted to it, even though it may be something that isn't necessarily useful. Also on August 2nd, we have Mars making a half square with Chiron. And this is a little bit of a deeper, more problematic issue because it stirs up our assertion, our drive, and it puts it in conflict to those personal wounds and cultural wounds that have basically gotten in our way, that are stood in our way. And this can be a blockage of sort. And so I don't think August 2nd is all that easy, but it could be exciting. And it's actually leading us toward the Leo new moon. We can see here on August 2nd that the sun is at 10 degrees, almost 11 degrees of Leo, and the moon is still back in emotional and sensitive and caring Cancer. But the moon actually moves from Cancer into Leo on August 3rd at 4:09 a.m. And by August 4th, at noon, we can see that the moon is already past the sun. It's past the new moon, and the actual new moon chart is for 4:13 a.m., and that's Pacific Daylight Time. And that new moon, the sun and moon exactly align at 12 degrees of Leo and 34 minutes. And this new moon is basically a seed that's being planted in a playful, exciting, self-expressive way. And this new moon is getting a bump. It's getting a bump of support because this new moon is sextiling Mars and Jupiter. Now remember, the new moon itself is at about 12.5 degrees of Leo. Mars and Jupiter are both at 10 and 15 degrees of Gemini, and the halfway point between the two of them is actually 12.5 degrees. So we have this new moon that is sextiling the exact halfway point or midpoint between Mars and Jupiter. What's Mars and Jupiter? Remember, this conjunction's still building. It's not exact until the 14th. So we're still like a week and a half away from the exact Mars-Jupiter conjunction. But we're getting a flavor of it now because Mars is assertion, it's direction. It can be anger, it can be conflict. Jupiter is a magnifying lens. Jupiter says more. It says bigger. Now, normally, we think bigger, better, and more are cool things, and so Jupiter is considered to be a positive or a benefic planet. But it's important to understand that too much of a good thing is not necessarily good. I've said this many times before, but going all the way back to Hippocrates, Hippocrates said that any tonic, in other words, a medicine that's good for you, in excess dose is toxic. And Jupiter can expand something and magnify it, amplify it, and make it something that isn't good. And remember here that Jupiter is also making that square and a half to Pluto, with Mars coming into that square and a half to Pluto. That's not exact until August 12th, and then the conjunction is exact on the 14th. So we have something stirring here that is going to build to a crescendo, and that crescendo is going to be just a few days before the Democratic National Convention begins, but it's going to be catalyzed at the full moon on the first day of the convention. So we're going to get there, but I'm trying to build the case for what I think is going to be an extraordinary turn of events, and yet just like the extraordinary turn of events or events in July, we knew when they would occur, but no one knew exactly. I mean, there were astrologers who said that Biden would step down, but some of that is more than just astrology. It was just, on some levels, just intuition and common sense. But the dates then become key because we don't know what will happen exactly, but we know when. And so we're getting a flavor of August being, again, I'm calling it the month of cosmic whiplash because it's just building on the craziness of the events that occurred already in July. All right, that's August 4th. And this new moon is incredibly important, not just because it's being amped up by the sextile of the Jupiter, of the building Mars-Jupiter conjunction, but there's a number of other things going on, and one of them is that Venus, as it's changing signs from Leo into Virgo, it's going to make an exact quincunx with Neptune. Quincunx is 5/12. Ptolemy said this was not an aspect. He called it an inconjunct. There was nothing, planets couldn't see each other. We moderners, however, know that the 5/12 angle is incredibly powerful and it requires adjustment. It's irritating. It's annoying. But an irritation isn't something that just is like, it's just an irritation. An irritation can be so strong that it creates welts and rashes on the body. An irritation can be severe. And Venus will make that quincunx to Neptune, again, making it difficult to know what's real. It's been an ongoing theme. Venus is what we like, it's what we're attracted to, and Neptune is illusion. And so here it's like, what the heck is going on? And as Venus moves from Leo into Virgo, it will then make that same exact quincunx to Pluto. And when you have two planets that are sextile one another, like right now on the chart we're looking at on August 4th, we have Neptune making a sextile with Pluto, and although it's not exact, it's within 1 degree of orb. And so as Venus makes a quincunx with Neptune, it will then almost immediately make a quincunx with Pluto. And this pattern of a sextile and two quincunxes is called a finger of God or a yod. It's really an isosceles triangle, a triangle with two sides the same. And Venus becomes the apex. It becomes the irritant. It becomes the place at which the planets trying to get their stuff together kind of come out. August 4th is not a simple new moon, and astrologers who say, oh, it's going to be great because it's getting that sextile from Mars or from Jupiter and Mars, they're missing the fact that Jupiter and Mars is also forming a square and a half to Pluto, and that is motivating to resolve conflict in a way that typically is externally aimed because it's a square and a half. It's outside the realm of the square, and with that finger of God or yod pointing at Venus, we are in a state of maximum irritation and may not have an easy solution to how much energy is being expressed in whatever ways it is being expressed. That is August 4th and the 5th, because the Venus actually, by the 5th, makes the exact quincunx to Pluto, but it's that period of time, August 4th and 5th. By the time we get to the 6th, the Sun is now making a square and a half with Neptune. And again, we see these alternating waves of these outer planets now being aspected of Pluto, where deep things are touching it, where we have the Jupiter making the square and a half to Pluto. That is exact tomorrow on the 7th, but we're already like so close, we might as well be there. And the Sun making a square and a half to Neptune. Jupiter square and a half to Pluto is like so much is coming up and out into the open. We have to work on it. We have to deal with it. We have to move through it. And the Sun making its square and a half to Neptune is just fuzzing everything out and making it difficult to know what's real. So on this, and by the way, here we also have had the moon that moved into Virgo on the 5th. And it did that in the afternoon yesterday, on Monday afternoon, and it did that at about 2:16 p.m. So here we are on the 7th now, and at noon the moon is at 22 degrees of Virgo, but we have the Sun now making its exact sextile with Jupiter. And so the exact sextile is going to magnify things even more. And on the same day, Jupiter is making that exact sesqui-square, square and a half to Pluto. And so I think the energy can get out of control. There's just like so much going on, whether it's political events in the United States, whether it's events in Ukraine, whether it's things going on, in the Middle East, in Gaza and Israel, or Iran, or Lebanon. There's so many hotspots right now, but the energy is building, and I think it's already, by August 7th, it's already feeling difficult to contain. Note also that retrograde Mercury, and I think we mentioned that again, but Mercury turned retrograde on the 4th, and Venus is still moving forward because Venus is not retrograding. Mercury now retrograding, it backs into Venus, and it makes that exact lineup also today on August 7th, that this lineup is exact, not until technically until 8:12 p.m., but this is a compression, a condensation, an attempted synthesis of retrograde Mercury. Now remember, retrograde planets are closer to Earth, and when Mercury is retrograde, part of the problem that we have with dealing with those meltdowns that we sometimes have with Mercury retrograde, or even Mercury in its shadow. Remember, when Mercury squared Uranus on the day that Biden declined the nomination, stepped down, we also, within a day or two of that, also had the largest internet outage that stopped the planets in its tracks. The impact of that is still being dealt with weeks later. But Mercury retrograde is more powerful and more dynamic, and it's exalted and in its domicile in Virgo. So Mercury is really potent, and it lining up with Venus is giving us a chance to say, Mercury, to speak what it is that we, Venus, want, because Venus is our desires. And that may or may not go over well, but we certainly have a condensation here of Virgoan energy on the 6th and 7th when the moon is moving through Virgo with Mercury approaching that conjunction with Venus, really giving us a chance in some ways to be very effective in our communication, but it's also difficult to jump into the complexity and the speed at which we're thinking, because that Mercury is really overamping. This is a little bit like almost like an intellectual hyperactivity, and it's moving so quickly that it's hard to just know where, it's hard to jump in. It's hard to get going. But if you can find that place in, it can be very, very powerful as a form of expression. As we move on the 8th, the moon moves from Virgo into Libra. It does that very early in the morning at 2:31 a.m. And as the moon changes signs from Virgo into Libra, it makes an opposition first to Neptune and then a trine to Pluto. The moon moves so quickly, these may not be long-term events, but it certainly can be a heightened expression of energy as Pluto releases the tension. And again, we're talking about the collective. We're talking about Pluto in Aquarius still. Pluto backing up into Capricorn. It doesn't get there until next month, but it's inching its way backwards from Aquarius back into Capricorn for a quick revisit, and then it'll move back into Aquarius in December. Let's jump ahead to the 9th, where we can see now the moon in mid-Libra is making trines with Mars and Jupiter, and it's also making a sextile to the sun. This little, sometimes called a minor grand trine, it's really a trine-sextile relationship. It's creating a hum that is accentuating the energy of the summer sun in Leo, and it's magnifying it with the Jupiter-Mars conjunction that's still building toward the 14th. But the moon making a trine to the Mars and Jupiter is bringing that energy out in a way that can be very useful again. The problem is that now the sun and the moon, which are sextile one another, even if it's only for a few hours because the moon moves rather quickly, the moon and the sun making a sextile while both of them are making quincunxes to Saturn. So now we have Saturn being the problem. Before we had Venus, we had the apex down at Venus in late Leo, early Virgo. But now we have a whole different arrangement here, and we have this focus of energy between the moon and the sun and Mars and Jupiter, and yet Mars and Jupiter are not easily aspected. They're making that square and a half to Pluto, and the sun in particular, because it holds longer than the moon, is making a quincunx to Saturn, and now the structure of Saturn is in our way, and we see something else now building day by day by day, and that is Jupiter and Mars are both moving toward making an exact square to Saturn. Now, again, Saturn is about stability, it's status quo. Saturn is the hard work we need to do to get to wherever it is we're going. Saturn is social structure. It's the laws. It's the laws that we can't break. Saturn is the wall that we can't just go crashing through or climbing over. And when expansive Jupiter moves towards squaring Saturn, we feel this pressure because we want to grow, we want to expand, and yet Saturn is holding us back until everything is right and everything is in place. And if everything is not right and everything not in place, Saturn won't let us grow. And yet Jupiter is relentless. It's not going to stop pushing. And into that, we have Mars coming with a little bit of heat under the collar, a little bit of anger, a bit of forcefulness. And so we can see this energy building. So that's through the 9th. Now, we have on the 10th, we have the moon moving from Libra into Scorpio late in the day, and the moon actually enters Scorpio at 3:33 p.m. So here on the noon chart, you can still see that the moon is still, or you can see that the moon is still back at 28 degrees of Libra, but because it moves about a degree every couple of hours, the moon actually moves into Scorpio, and when the moon moves from Libra into Scorpio, it's going to square Pluto amongst other things. And there's a bit of tension here now again that is taking over in the chart. And in fact, we already have talked about the Jupiter and Mars making the square and a half to Pluto. Mars still coming into it, Jupiter done with it, but the two of them together really kind of, within orb. And the moon, as it moves from Libra into Scorpio, is going to make a square and a half with Mars and Jupiter from the other side, while it's making a square to Pluto. This is sometimes called Thor's hammer or an iron yod. Now we have Jupiter and Mars at the apex of this triangle, and the energy is now coming there. It may be a little bit more difficult to keep things together because things are out of control, and yet both Mars and Jupiter are moving towards the square to Saturn, and Saturn saying, I don't care how out of control things are, I'm keeping a handle on it. I'm going to make anyone pay the price who takes anything too far right now. So that's what's going on here on the 10th. By the 11th, we now have Venus making an exact square and a half with Chiron. We want to be nice, but somehow things are not coming out nicely. Again, there's some motivational anxiety between how we would like things to be versus how other people may be taking it, or maybe other people are trying to make amends to us and something's not right with it, so we're not able to accept it. And then we get to August 12th, and on August 12th, we now have Mars at that 15 degrees of Gemini, making the square and a half, the 90 degrees, and then a half of a square, 45 degrees. So 0 plus 135 brings us to that Mars exactly now, square and a half to Pluto. And when Mars and Pluto make a tense aspect, whether it's a conjunction, a half square, a square and a half, an opposition, this is when things seem to get out of hand. This is when there's a power struggle between the urgency and the immediacy of Mars in Gemini, which is not very containable. Mars is all over the map. Mars is running in every direction while it's in Gemini. It's very adaptable, but it's also now taking on Pluto. And it has Jupiter behind it, or in front of it, actually, pumping that energy up. Mars is still building into Jupiter. And so we're seeing here this confluence, like a lot of tributaries meeting a bigger river and coming all together before they hit open ocean. And I think August 12th is going to be a rather difficult day because we're just coming off of the Venus a square and a half to Chiron, where we have the Mars that's square and a half to Pluto. We also now have Mercury retrograding heading towards a re-entry into Leo, and Mercury re-enters Leo on the 14th. But right now on the 12th, it's beginning to pick up on a quincunx. We're back to the quincunxes, the annoyance, the irritation, the need for adjustment. And this time it's to Pluto. And Mercury and Pluto have an interesting story because Mercury is the guide that leads us into the hell realms. It helps us. It helps the spirit move from one dimension to another. And so Mercury now retrograde and powerful. It's all about communication. Mercury making a quincunx with Pluto. That's exact on the 14th. Let's jump this ahead to the 14th now. We also have on the 13th, on the way to the 14th, we have the moon moving into Sagittarius. That's at 3 a.m. The moon moving into Sagittarius. We kind of open our vision. We see possibilities. We're ready to do something. We're ready to go. Although the moon is squaring, as it makes that sign change, it's squaring Mercury. And so going isn't all that easy. It's a complicated sequence of events. But by the 14th, with the moon still in Sagittarius, the moon reaches a point where it's now opposite the Jupiter and Mars, and it's square to Saturn, making some real dynamic energy. In fact, Venus is now moving toward its square to Jupiter and Mars, and towards its opposition to Saturn, and this will be exact over the next few days, and this is why August is such an intense and powerful and changeful, dynamic month that we just can't imagine yet what's around the bend. So here on the 14th, we now have Mercury making the exact quincunx with Pluto. It's also coming into, because it's moving backwards, it's coming into its exact quincunx with Neptune. That's not exact till tomorrow, the 15th. But here on the 14th, we now have the exact conjunction of Mars and Jupiter. We can see that Mars has jumped from one side of, if we go back a day to the 13th, we can see that Mars is just to the left of Jupiter, and then by the next day, Mars and Jupiter have flipped sides. Mars has overtaken Jupiter. That exact conjunction is at 8:21 a.m., but slow-moving planets like this, the exact moment sometimes isn't what's important. It's a trigger, but we do have a trigger here from the moon making its opposition to Jupiter and Mars and making a square to Saturn. Somehow here Saturn being the apex of this T-square, an opposition with a planet square both sides of the opposition. That would be Saturn. There's something here about the rule, the law, the structure holding, whether we like the rule or not. There's something here that becomes very important about the role that Saturn plays in all this, but it ain't over, because we also have on the 14th Mercury actually backing into Leo on the 14th, where all of a sudden it's not as effective and as efficient as it might have been for that week or so that it was in Virgo, where it's at home and it also is exalted. And as it moves back into Leo, and that occurs actually at 5:15 p.m. today on the 14th, on Wednesday the 14th, but as it moves back into Leo, it's going to shout its message from the mountaintop. It's going to come back into that self-expression mode. And now we have not only Mercury back in Leo, self-expressive Leo, we have the sun in Leo, and we also have the moon in fiery Sagittarius, kind of feeding into this whole, fiery energy that's really kind of taking over right now. And we also have by the 15th, we have the sun making an exact trine. It's already working that on the 14th, this trine to Chiron. The moon in Sagittarius on the 14th makes this fiery grand trine. The energy is intense right now. This T-square is intense, kind of making conflict, making structure that is in the way of progress. And yet at the same time, we have the light of vitality, of illumination, the sun in Leo shining its light in a free-flowing, harmonious way with healer Chiron, and the moon in Sagittarius saying there is a way out of this, although it takes being aware. It takes identifying the truth. This is a very powerful period of time with a combination of the T-square from the moon Saturn to the Mars Jupiter, with a grand trine, grand fire trine of the moon Chiron and the sun, and this Yod, finger of God, of the sextile between Neptune and Pluto, with now Mercury at the point of it rather than Venus, where it was about a week ago or so, a week and a half ago. Incredibly dynamic. But we're just warming up or heating up, because this is a crazy amount. I say crazy, I mean it's an intense amount of stuff going on. And then by the following day, by the 15th, we have, first of all, we have the moon moving into Capricorn, and the moon moves into Capricorn at just before noon at 10:51 a.m. Pacific time. And of course, as the moon is moving into Capricorn, it's going to make a square to Neptune. What the hell's going on? Meaning that we think we have our feet on the ground. The moon in Capricorn, we get serious. Saturn, remember, is being squared by Mars exactly today on the 15th. Mars is making that exact square. I mean, this energy has been rampant and all around, but Mars is making the exact square. Jupiter is still just moving a bit slower than Mars, but it's going to come into that square by the 19th, just in a few days. But here on Thursday the 15th, we have Mars squaring Saturn, hot, cold, do it, don't do it, gas, brake. It's going to be fine. It's awful. It's going to be great. Let's just go faster. Let's go pedal to the metal. Can't. I'm already out of control. Shouldn't have hit the gas at all. I want to go home. Can't go home. We're going. It's that kind of frustration. And that in itself would be enough just with the Mars Saturn. But the Jupiter there is making it even bigger and making it even more. And yet we have this healing potential with the sun trining Chiron. Very, very profound, very, very powerful. And with the moon moving through Capricorn, we're tending to be, if not more cautious, more determined, more serious. We want to have it right. We want to get it together. And on the 16th, as the moon is moving through Capricorn, it'll pick up midday on a trine to Venus in Virgo. The energy is a bit more, it feels maybe a bit easier, more harmonious, but we still got some serious shit cooking. And what we got cooking is we still have Jupiter coming into the exact square to Saturn, even though Mars is slightly past it now, that Mars and Jupiter are still functioning kind of together because they're so close. And we have Venus now moving closer and closer day by day towards that 17-degree point where it will square Jupiter and oppose Saturn. And so this is very powerful stuff going on. During the same time, we have Venus making a square and a half to Pluto. Once again, this is about being motivated. Our feelings and what we want are not fitting in with the deeper energies of what's unfolding. And then as we move to that would be the Venus sesqui-square, Pluto is on the 17th. But we can see now Venus moving even closer to its opposition to Saturn and its square to Jupiter and Mars. And we see that Jupiter now just minutes of arc away from being exact. It's already partile, meaning same degree, 17 degrees, 17 degrees. It's already partile square Saturn, but the pressure is still building. And then by the 18th, on the 18th, we now have this replay of Mercury making that square to Uranus. Remember, I talked about that at the beginning when I talked about that Mercury square Uranus was exact the day that Biden declined his nomination, and also connected to the whole internet meltdown that occurred. That whole sequence of events in some ways is now being stirred up again, maybe very different events, but it's still the abrupt communication. Something is said, something is explosive, something changes everything, and it's Mercury now retrograding back into that square to Uranus that's exact at 2:46 early in the morning on August 18th. And at the same time, we have a Mercury cazimi, which means that Mercury is in the heart of the sun. Not only is Mercury making a square to Uranus, but the sun is coming into a square to Uranus that's not exact until tomorrow. Meanwhile, the Venus is now exactly square on the 18th. It's exactly square Jupiter. That's not exact until almost midnight, 10:52 p.m. But Venus and Jupiter are benefics. They're considered easier to deal with. But again, Jupiter and Venus are pumping up each other's energy. This is overdoing. This feels so good, let's do more. This tastes so good, let's eat more. This shot of tequila was so great, let's drink the whole bottle. It's like overdoing, overindulgence. We don't know when to stop. That Mars is feeding it also, and yet at the same time, Venus is not only being exacerbated, being encouraged, being expanded, being amplified by this kind of bravado of the Mars-Jupiter conjunction, but it's also running into an opposition to Saturn. And that opposition is exact tomorrow. Well, let's make it today, on August 19th. We have Venus now exactly partile. It actually occurs in the morning at 1:29 a.m., but Venus opposing Saturn. And although it's just past the square to Jupiter, it's still coming into its square with Mars. And so this is an incredible T-square on the 19th of go for it, do it, Mars, Jupiter in Gemini, say what needs to be said, dance here, move here, kind of just go with it, adapt, make the changes. Saturn saying, whoa, I'm not being really clear because I'm in Pisces and I'm not as clear and hard-nosed as I usually am. All I know is that it's not working the way you want to do it. And Venus is saying, yeah, but I want to go here and I want this because this is going to feel good. And it's over-amping. Now, that in itself would be plenty. But by the 19th, the moon in Aquarius is full. The full moon in Aquarius occurs at 11:25 a.m., just before midday Pacific time. And this will therefore be 11:25, will be about 1:30 in the afternoon in Chicago, Central Daylight Time, where the Democratic Convention is being held. And not only do we have the Jupiter-Mars squaring Saturn and in a T-square with Venus, not only that, but we have a full moon in Aquarius with Mercury lining up with the sun, retrograde Mercury, and that full moon at roughly 27 and a half degrees. It's actually technically at 27 and a quarter degrees, 27 degrees and 15 minutes of Aquarius. And Uranus is like 27 degrees, about 27 and a quarter degrees also. This full moon and therefore the sun are both squaring Uranus. And remember, Uranus was the culprit at both the Biden declining the nomination, the Biden announcement, and also it was also at the attempted assassination of of Donald Trump, that was the Mercury square Uranus, or the Mars lined up with Uranus. Now we have Mars lined up with Jupiter, making the Mars even hotter and angrier and more expansive, squared to Saturn, and we have this Sun and Mercury and the Moon all squaring Uranus. What's going to happen? I don't know. But I'll be real surprised if nothing happens. And, the part of me that steps out of astrologer role and just pays attention to events, because remember, astrology is about coordinating what goes on up there with what goes on down here. It's about making correspondences. And it seems to me that the conflict in the Mideast between the Israeli state and or Israeli government and the Palestinians and or Hamas, that's now expanded into also its conflict with Lebanon and with Iran and so on, that we may see that becoming an absolute out of control major event that maybe adds to or creates dynamics around public displays, whether it's people in the streets. I and many other astrologers have certainly been thinking about the Democratic National Convention in Chicago of 1968. And if you don't know what happened then, Google it. But I really think that we have a setup here for something that is going to be an important turn of events, and I don't know what it is and how it's going to unfold. All right. Enough said there. The mid-month update that I will do on the 15th, for those of you who are solar tier subscribers on Patreon, I'll obviously be focusing in on this a whole lot more. Even though I've done a deep dive on it now, it will certainly be a key point by the time I do that mid-month update, because the beginnings of whatever these events are will likely have already begun to unfold. Now, we have here and I'm going to be light on the second half of the month because I will cover that in the mid-month update, but just some of the major events. Oh, and I also want to come back to the Jupiter square Saturn, which we did talk about earlier. But again, this is such a deep, long-term event that it affects decades. And in fact, because it occurs 3 times, Jupiter will turn retrograde and then direct again. This is not going to play through until next summer, but we're feeling the social constraints, Saturn, the need to maintain the status quo, Saturn, conservatism, Saturn, and that's both fiscal and political conservatism. And then on the other hand, we have Jupiter, which is expansive. This is progressive. This is movement. This is change. And with Mars feeding it, we have this dynamic between, again, the grow and move forward, the progressive, and the hold back or move backward, and hold on to the past. This is the conflict, and this is coming to a head around this period of time. The sun moves into Virgo by August 22nd. We're going to jump this ahead. Oh, and by the way, later on the 19th, because the full moon is at 27 degrees of Aquarius, by 3:51 p.m. today, on the 19th, the moon will move into Pisces, and that could settle the energies a little bit, but it also confuses things, because as the moon moves through Pisces on the 19th, 20th, and into the early part of the 21st, that moon's going to move through Pisces and line up with Saturn and Neptune, and again give us another reality check with Saturn, and then a total dream realm diffusion, imagination, fake news, whatever is going to come kicking back in before the moon moves into Aries on the afternoon of the 21st. By the 22nd, actually, early in the morning is when the sun changes signs and moves from Leo into Virgo, perfecting its quincunx to Pluto. On the 22nd, this yod is very important on the 21st and 22nd. But we also have now Venus moving into its exact square to Mars. Venus and Mars are not all right tonight. Venus and Mars, they're the cosmic lovers. Venus is what we like. It's what we're attracted to. It's what we consider beautiful. In Virgo, of course, it's not comfortable. It has a big checklist. It's cautious. It's timid. It doesn't want to open up and love until everything is right. And with its square, first to Jupiter and now to Mars, it's kind of at odds. It knows what it likes, but it doesn't know how to get there. Venus and Mars are duking it out. Now, Venus and Mars square can be immensely creative. It can be immensely playful. In love, Venus and Mars squares can be absolutely a blast. But unless there's respect and common goal, then Venus and Mars squares can be like just ego arguments and conflict and not having fun at all. But we have Venus squaring Mars, and we still have the Jupiter squaring Saturn. So that whole complicated thing is still in play on the 22nd. By the 23rd, we get a little bit of a reprieve. We're already feeling it on Thursday, the 22nd. But by the 23rd, retrograde Mercury backs into an exact trine with Chiron as the moon moving through Aries is lining up with it. This is almost like it's like a day of healing. It's a day of moving through things. And I think this is really important because we also have not just Mercury making this trine with the moon and Chiron, but it's also retrograding back toward, although it doesn't quite reach the exact sextile to Jupiter, it does reach the sextile to Mars. And so we have, again, one of these little kind of half grand trines, like a mini grand trine, where we have Mercury, Mars and Jupiter in there just because it's close enough. And Chiron, the moon will move out of that way pretty quickly. But this is actually a time where we can actually create some healing. It's almost like whatever's gone on, now it's time to move through it and work it out. It's not going to be easy, but we do have the ability to communicate because Mercury is making the trine to healer Chiron. And we also have the Mercury making the sextile to Mars. So our words have power. And Mars is making the sextile to Chiron, which is giving those two planets an ability to give us a path through the complicated old wounds that may be coming up now. That's the 23rd, and also on the 23rd, later in the day at 5 p.m., the moon moves into Taurus. The moon remains in Taurus all the way through the 25th, and we're going to actually take a quick jump here, just looking at the most important days of the end of the month. We can see the moon moving through Taurus. By midday on the 25th, on Sunday, the moon will be aligning with Uranus. And we also have a looming trine from Venus to Uranus, but the moon actually kicks that energy off on Sunday, the 25th, making, in a way, that we're already making a grand trine, but it's kind of out of element because the moon is going to move quickly today on the 25th from Taurus into Gemini. And when it does, that'll be at 8:03 p.m., it will actually pick up on that trine to Pluto. It's already picking up on it, but it's out of element. We have a trine from Uranus to Pluto that's actually under 3 degrees, but it's not in the same element. It's not air, Pluto, airy Aquarius, to the moon when it gets to airy Gemini. That'll be same element. Pluto, when it backs up into Capricorn, will be Earth, and that'll be then in the same element as the trine to Uranus. But right now, we're still picking up on this movement, and actually the aspects that we have are creating some really magical openings even within all the conflict. Why? Because we have the Mercury trine Chiron, and both of them sextile to the Mars-Jupiter. And separate from that, we have the moon Uranus that's trining or being trined by Venus and by Pluto. And that actually has in it a looming opposition from Venus to Neptune, making this a kite. A kite is a grand trine with a planet in opposition. Here it would be Neptune to one of the points in the grand trine. And that gives us a way out of complacency. So I think that these days, toward the end of August, we're getting some real movement, but we're also getting Venus coming into an opposition to Neptune. This is, again, we're unable to tell what's projection and what's really out there, because Venus is our attraction to those things which are dreamy, imaginative, and illusion. And we also have that Venus trining Uranus. And remember, we had a Venus square Uranus earlier, and that was conflict between wanting something new or different and it not necessarily being good, but it being incredibly exciting. Now it's exciting, but there's flow. We get what we wanted before at the square. That Venus-Uranus square was back around where'd it go? Let's see, the Mercury-Uranus square was on August 18th, and then the Venus-Uranus square was all the way back at the beginning of the month, back on August 2nd. Now we're getting a Venus-Uranus trine, and this is saying that the unexpected, the breakthrough, the rebellion actually feels good, and the moon is there too. So I think August 25th could be an interesting day with movement, and then by the 28th. The Venus trine Uranus is the moon Uranus together is on the 25th. The actual Venus trine Uranus, the moon's out of the picture, is exact on the 27th, but you can see how that whole grand trine and kite is actually getting stronger. And then by the 28th, Venus is exactly opposite Neptune, but it's still, that trine is still all there and cooking. So we have some really strong energy toward the end of the month. And also on the 28th, Mercury completes its retrograde period, and at 21 degrees of Leo, where it entered the shadow back on July 16th, we now have Mercury kind of picking up on that point again, turning direct, and yet it's going to be moving through familiar territory again for the third and final time. In fact, it'll make that third and final square to Uranus on September 6th, and it will actually move out of Leo back into Virgo, and it will move out of its shadow I think on the 11th. It moves into Virgo on September 8th, and then out of its shadow on the 11th. So dynamic ending of the month, Mercury moving direct. It may take a few days to feel it, but things are moving somewhere new. They're moving forward. Venus leaves Virgo and it enters Libra on the 29th at 6:22 a.m. It makes a trine to Pluto. Again, this grand trine is still cooking, but now there's a deeper solution, something going on. It may not be easy, but stuff is coming up. We're moving forward. And I think that there is certainly still complications. The dance is not over. But this month, again, I said at the very beginning, I think it's going to be somehow the title of the month. There's some cosmic whiplash that we're dealing with this month, and I will be real surprised if by the end of the month things haven't changed dramatically on several fronts, both national in the United States, presidential election, global, political, economic, personal, relationship-wise. Remember, the upstairs and the downstairs, the without and the within, the above and the below are one and the same on every level of existence. The universe is fractal, and what is appearing to be out there in the political realms is also occurring in our hearts and in our individual realms. So thank you for staying with me. This was a pretty intense and long ride this month for August. For many of you, I'll see you mid-month around the 15th. It'll probably be more like the 16th or 17th. I want to get as close to what the energy is so I can really feel it when I record it rather than just guessing about it into the future. So that's it for now. As always, think cosmically, act locally. And when I say act locally, I mean really locally. I mean act with compassion, open your minds, open your hearts, try to understand what's going on, because the freedom of choice that we have right now, when I say freedom of choice, I don't mean with respect to any one political issue. I mean the freedom to impact the long-term trajectory that we are on individually, socially, culturally, nationally, politically. That turning point will soon be over. And although the events will still take time to play out, we won't have the opportunity to effect as much change a month or 2 or 3 or 6 down the road as we do now. So think cosmically, but act locally. And of course, be safe. I'm Rick Levine. Peace out. See you all soon.